Well, welcome to another episode of Uncut and Unfiltered Cosmetology Insights with Nathan Shaw, where we help aspiring and current beauty professionals master the business and the craft of cosmetology so that they can build successful, long lasting careers. Your guide is Nathan Shaw, a dedicated educator and working man's hairdresser who successfully built his schools from his earnings from behind the chair. And he now generously shares his deep industry experience to challenge misconceptions and to teach you the crucial skills you need to manage your career. I'm your host, Andy Traub, and today we're going to talk about something that ruins thousands of careers in this industry every year. And it's not pricing, and it's not your skills behind the chair. It's comparison. So let's get into it. Nathan, this was your idea for a show topic, and I want to ask you, where does it come from for you? This is one of our very first 10 episodes, and so we've made a point to really make our first 10 12 episodes sort of like foundational. If you don't listen to those first 10, this is a big deal. So is it worse than it's been before? Like, why is it such a problem?
Yeah. Well, I do think it's worse than has been before. I've been in the industry about 25 years. I've owned schools for pushing close to 20 of that now. But it's always been a problem, right? We compare ourselves to others that seem like they're further ahead, and that can be discouraging if you think you're falling behind. Number one, it's maybe how you're looking at it. But I think it's gotten worse, a lot due to social media, right? The technology generation. That wasn't around when I started my career. I'm old enough that wasn't a thing.
Let's just create a picture of this. What was comparison when 30 years ago? How were people comparing themselves to other people? Like where would they see stuff?
A lot of times it'd be within your own salon, or just like most industries, they can be kind of small when you're in a geographical location, your city, your town. Like, you kind of know what other salons are doing, or you think maybe might be more important.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, you think right?
Yeah, sometimes there's this perceived, they're so much wealthier than I am, or their salon does so much better and they charge more, and they have all these advantages that maybe they don't have, but you've created this perception and you've conceived it in your mind and you believe it, right? Right. I think that was a lot of it. I have an experience that is kind of funny. Years ago, our salon was picked by Elle magazine as one of the top 100 salons in America, our little salon in Boise, Idaho, right? And, then In Touch Weekly, another weekly magazine, they interviewed us for something, and we were mentioning that. And we had a little bit of a, notoriety there for a minute in national publications, which was it's cool, and it's a good pat on the back, But I remember I met up with some old high school buddies, and we had dinner one night. I hadn't seen the one kid for years, and I believe it was his ex-wife was a hairdresser. And he was telling me, he had a few drinks, and he started getting a little loose. Told me, he was like, yeah, my wife, and basically, I can't remember exactly how I told the story, but his wife was pretty derogatory towards us. Thought, oh yeah, well, we charge like, some ridiculous amount for haircuts at our salon. And I was like, I wish, that was supposedly why we were picked. That's how we were picked, because our prices were so high. But what it made me realize is everybody can be guilty of that. We make assumptions about what, like, we didn't charge that much. I wish what she said was true, because I would have been a wealthy man, but there's a lot of things we definitely conceive in our minds that aren't true.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm thinking about, on a really practical level, comparison was probably magazines. I mean, it was mass market magazines, right? And if it was the internet, it wasn't uploaded to the minute, hashtagged stuff. There might have been a website about it, right? But maybe there were some trade shows, right? Industry events, sort of thing. Maybe you saw something on television, right? But this idea that you could literally search a hashtag on the internet on a specific app and get thousands of results, right? Or go to YouTube and find hundreds of people doing something and showing you what they did, it just didn't exist.
No.
right? None of that existed. And so now you can see, and then the other thing is people are lying and they're photoshopping, or they're saying it only took this much time, or they're saying I make this much money, right? Or it's just this easy. I remember one time I was there was my wife and my wife's van, the heated seats went out, and I was like, oh, maybe I can fix that. And I watched a tutorial on it, and I was like, yeah, I can't do that. And it was like one of the few times that I was like, this person is very honest, and they're like, this took me 3 hours, and they showed me what they did. I was like, yeah, I'm out. Like my wife's gonna just have a cold back, sorry. But that's it. I remember that because it's one of the few times that someone was really like honest, where I was like, I'm not gonna even try. Most of the time, people make it look a lot easier than it really is, or you don't see that they did that for 10 years to get that good, right? So
Absolutely.
comparison can be really, really, really negative. And social media puts pressure on professionals to be able to do that thing now. And maybe they just need to give themselves more time. One of the things that you focus on teaching people in your schools is that you have to understand people start from different places. What does that mean to start from a different place in this industry?
Well, I was, and I probably still look it, but I was kind of a product of the 90s grunge era, right? So
Okay.
it was long hair. You didn't put a lot of work in your hair. It was kind of the antithesis of the 80s where they had the big hair and the Aquanet, right? But
Aquanet, let's go. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
But what I really remember is like I started school, and one of the girls in my starting class, she was in her early 30s, had 2 kids at home. They were in school now, so she was going to go to cosmetology school. Her husband had been the breadwinner, so to speak, and but she'd been doing perms in her house, been doing hair on friends and family for over a decade. And I remember
Wow.
I remember one of the first days we're wrapping perms, learning how to roll rods and wrap perms in hair, and I could not get the dexterity in my fingers to work at that time because they'd never done it. And I was so frustrated. She had her head almost completely wrapped, and I was still in the first bottom section on the bottom of the head. I literally took the mannequin head off the stand, threw it in the garbage, and stormed off. I was so angry. I went to the break room, and I just remember thinking, what have I got myself into? These girls are kicking my butt. I could never do this. Luckily, I had a great patient instructor. I remember kind of peeking out from the break room, I need to go back and figure out what I'm going to do to learn this. And I saw her pull the mannequin head out, and she was kind of brushing it back out and getting it set up for me, so I could. I think she knew I was going to cool down, which I did.
Yeah.
But I've had a fabulous career, and I've had tons of success, but they were way ahead of me, but it didn't mean I couldn't have the success that I had either.
Let me ask you, give me some encouragement. I want those who are listening to be encouraged if they're looking to get in the industry and maybe they're like, you know what, I want to do this because I kind of want to do this, but I really don't want to do a lot of other things. So I'm just going to give this a shot. A friend sent me this, my parents sent me this, someone else sent me this to listen to. And it's like, if you're considering getting in the industry, make sure this is true about comparison, especially if you feel behind before you've started, right? Give me some examples or stories of people getting really good or way better from their first day of school to their last day of school. Are people surprised about how much a really good school can help them get better?
I think some are, for sure. I think of an example. This was in the first few years of us having a school. We had a student, and at the time it was 2,000 hours in Idaho to get your cosmetology license. It's, most states are lower than that. But I remember, people start out, again, like I said, all different places, and she struggled to get things. She struggled to make the connections you'd teach her and how to cut hair or how to color hair, different things, different techniques in particular. She really struggled mastering those techniques. And that's expected when you're new, right? But I do remember about midway through school and maybe a little past her midway point as, one of her educators getting concerned, oh my gosh, this girl is not going to get it. This stuff's not clicking yet. But this goes back to where everybody's different, right? And I remember she hit about the 1,800 hour mark. So she was probably 90% done with school. And it's like a light switch flipped, right? It's like the switch flipped and suddenly everything clicked with her, right? And she was just doing great work. And we're like, oh my gosh, she's going to make it, right? And not only she's going to make it,
yeah,
she's she gets it now and she's going to be successful at it. And when you see stuff like that, it's really exciting to see. And it is one of those things that, like, don't get discouraged when it's hard when you start. You know, I had that experience. I couldn't hold a curling iron, let alone use it properly. Whereas the girls I was in school with, all used curling irons on their hair. I'd never done that in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
We were talking about this, I think, a little bit ago. We weren't recording at the time, I think, but we were talking about how the difficulty, the pain, the struggle should not be a surprise. It's it's when you go outside and it's 12 degrees, you shouldn't be like, man, why is it cold? Well, it's 12 degrees. Like, why am I shivering? It's 12 degrees, right? Or you go outside, it's 95 degrees, and you're like, why am I sweating? It's 95 degrees. Like, that shouldn't surprise you. Or you lift a weight and you're like, why is this thing so heavy? Oh, gravity. That's why, right? But people go into these school situations, and I think there's this expectation of like, well, maybe more for women than guys who are newer to it, but like, why would you know how to use a curling iron? You've never used one. Why would you know how to, put the hair in those, things you were like, why would you know? And of course you're going to be, these are not natural. Our fingers don't do that naturally. We have to learn that over time. And so part of this is setting the expectation of, as it relates to comparison, don't compare yourself to people who have been doing it a long time. Don't compare it to people that it's become second nature. They literally do it without thinking. Literally, they are not thinking about the thing they're doing. They're thinking about something else. They're having a conversation. And while they're having a conversation, they're doing this thing that if you give all of your attention to, you're still not very good at it, right? And it's just, you have to give yourself space to say, just because it's hard doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. It's just hard for a while, right? And that's okay, right? That's why you're in school. That's why you have instructors. That's why you're practicing. I want to ask you about ways that people can measure their progress. What are healthy ways people can measure their progress versus look on social media and go, well, I can't do that. No, can't do that. Can't do that. What are healthy ways that people should compare themselves to themselves?
I think you nailed it with the last part of that statement. Compare themselves to themselves. It's easy to have mentors, other people in the industry that we admire, that maybe help us set aspirational goals of what we want to achieve or how good we want to get. But the big thing is, and I talked about this at one point earlier, is there's a book I read called The Gap and the Gain. So often we measure ourselves on the gap of where we think we should be and where we currently are. So we're down here, this is where we're at, and we're looking like, here's our aspiration is to be up here. So we're always short of where we want to be. But really, sometimes you have to look back, like, where was I last year? Where was I 3 years ago, 5 years ago? And that can be with your financial statement, your income. It can, but definitely in this industry, it can be with your skill level. If you're in school, it can be, where was I at 3 months ago? Like 3 months ago, could I even hold this weave comb and the foil and the color brush at the same time? And now, it becomes, you've got that dexterity, that muscle memory, and you're like, even if I'm not as fast as I want to be, it's like, this is way simpler than it was when I did this the first time 3 months ago.
I had this experience, and I'm sure that it's happened in many other areas of life, but I had this experience, and this happened. It happened 19 years ago. I remember because I just had my 20th wedding anniversary, and it was a year after we got married that this happened. So it was 19 years ago, and I can still see it. If I close my eyes, I can still see it. That we bought this house. It was built in 1910. It was an absolutely gorgeous house, but needed a lot of work. And I remember we put in a drop ceiling, and thank the Lord Almighty, I had a friend who knew how to do the framing and drywall, yada yada. But I was putting in these canned lights. And like, there's a big kit and you just plug in some wires and it's not that hard. But like, the first one took me probably an hour for the first one, where there was only 4 lights in the whole room. The first one took me about an hour. The last one took me 10 minutes. And it wasn't like on the 100th one I got better. Like, the first one took me about an hour. The second one took me about a half an hour. The third one took me about 20 minutes. And the last one took me 10 minutes. So in 4 repetitions, cycles, whatever, reps, I got like 600% better, right? And I want that to be an encouragement to you that, like, sometimes the answer is just, you got to do it more, right? Like, and you will be shocked. And this is my thing. I was shocked at how much better I got in 4. And what's funny is I have never done it since, right? And I was like, I finally learned it. But But the good news for you listening is if you do something and you're like, boy, I give myself like a 1 to 10, I give myself like a 2. Okay. But the next time you might be a 6. The next time you might be a 7. Next time, right? But it's just, you can get better really quickly if you focus on, I'm getting better. And the gap is, gosh, it still took me 30 minutes. The gain, as Nathan was saying, is it took you half as long. It took you 20% less time. If you do that again and it's 20% less and 20% less and 20% less, like after a while, you're going to get really good at this. So it's focusing on how did I get better, not looking at the lady at the chair next to you who's been doing it for 5 years and does it 10 times better than you. Of course she has. She's done it thousands of times, right?
Exactly. I have an experience that, this has happened to me many times. I did a lot of highlights and foils and colors. That was kind of my specialty. And I demonstrate it sometimes or help a student, and I cannot tell you how often the first comment is like, oh my gosh, how did you get that fast? Or how are you so fast? I could never do that. And I heard another hairdresser say this years ago, and I stole it. She said, how did you get so fast? She said, well, the first 10,000 foils are the hardest. And and there's a lot of truth to that. It goes back to reps, I use the term reps a lot. It's like, you've got to get the reps in to where that becomes second nature. And you do get faster, just like you said about the lights. The first one's the hardest. Second one's not quite as hard. And pretty soon it gets to where it's easy because you've done it so much, right?
I want to give a huge encouragement. If you're listening, focus in. I want to encourage you. One of the very coolest things about this industry is you're going to get paid to get better. A lot of people have to pay, and that's school, and you got to pay for school. But even in school, you can maybe, find work, or you can, practice on real people, right? There's part of that. But the idea that you're like, man, I'm not that good. Okay, but you're making money being not that good. And of course you're not that good. You just started. But the idea that like you're getting paid to get better is phenomenal. That's Absolutely. a great, like my daughter, I have 2 daughters. My 16-year-old daughter, I took her to go do a pretty manual task. We were staining a deck for this business here in town. And I took her to kind of help me, do that task. And we painted the whole deck. And we stepped back and we're like, this looks horrible. The color swatch versus what we had was the same. But like if you blew it up, it was like, that looks like a pumpkin. And we were not expecting pumpkin. We were expecting more brown, And she was so frustrated. And I was like, honey, we're getting paid right now to learn different colors. And we have to do a couple coats anyway. So that was our base coat. And now we're going to go get a different color for the next coat because this color's bad. I said, but we're getting paid to they're not going to charge us more. We're not, she's like, well, it costs a little bit more money. Okay, well, that's okay. But is it going to cost all of our money? I mean, it costs probably 10% of our profits to choose the wrong color. I was like, well, what if it costs 90% of our profits? She's like, that'd be really bad. Well, they didn't. So let's be encouraged. So if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I'm discouraged at my speed. I'm discouraged at my skill. If you're getting paid to get better, that's a good gig, right? 100%. That's good. So what's the answer is do more, get more reps in, like Nathan said. I want to ask you on a really practical level about comparison. And you said first is you have to make sure you're saying, hey, it's you against you. That's who your real competition is, because that's what you can control, right? But something else on a really practical level is, and we'll end with this, and we'll not end right now, but this is our last part of the show, is I want you to talk about how to control and or mute the noise. What are some practical things you encourage people to do in your school or just people in the industry that to keep the comparison under control?
That's a great question. I think the big thing is just, sometimes it's the bravado of someone else, right? Like, because they're able to post all these pictures and have this bravado of how great they are. To your point earlier, it's like, you don't know how much Photoshop's been used in some of those pictures, how many filters. You can make some things look really great that in real life don't look bad. That's something That's something that the technology has changed quite a bit for us as well, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, at the end of the day, it's like you're not in a race with someone, right? This isn't a race. At the end of the day, it's like, how do you get better so you can have the career that you want and that you desire? And what are the steps and actions you need to take? Not what someone else did. What do you need? Where do you need to focus your energy? Where do you need to focus your efforts in getting those reps? And where can you go gain more experience that's going to, that's going to make you, that 20% more efficient, and then 20% more efficient than that. It's really not about what someone else is doing, and you're not in a race. I think, and I used the comment earlier with social media, but we talk about how Instagram or some of these social media pages, they're the highlight reel of someone's life, right?
Yes.
It's like everyone's not in Bali all the time, or they're not on some big vacation, right?
Right. Yeah. I guess some people are in Bali all the time, but most people are not in Bali all the time. The other thing I want to encourage people is that other person might be that good. That those pictures might be accurate. They might be in Bali a lot, right? Okay. But you also don't know what they did to get there, right? You don't know. You didn't see all the hours of them working at a salon in Kansas before they moved to a bigger city to right? And the other is, you're not competing against them. If they're in Bali, unless you're in Bali, they're not your competition, right?
Yeah.
And so something that I want to encourage people to consider is, if you're watching something and it makes you feel less than, or not as good, or behind, or worse, then that is not inspiration, right? It's the opposite of inspiration, right? It's a depressant, right? And so the shift you can make is you can say, because I really think it's a shift, you can look at that and simply say, how can that inspire me? Or I'm going to let that inspire me versus I'm going to let that discourage me. The person that's we'll ride the Bali train. The person that's in Bali and doing hair there or on a vacation there, you could say, man, I want to study what they're doing more. I want them to be a mentor for me from afar. I'm going to learn what kind of language do they do? What books do they read? What kind of trends are they, using right now or exploring or utilizing? What tools? Because I want to get better versus going, oh, it must be nice to be in Bali, lucky them. No, hardworking them, right? So the other I would say is on a really practical level is, this is going to sound like a dad because I'm a dad, is I do think that at some point you need to put limits on your social media because, like I can have a beer, Nathan, but if I have two, I'm not driving. Because at some point, it's okay a little bit. A lot is not. It doesn't get better the more you have it, right?
True.
That's true of a lot of things. And I think with social media, it's good in bits, but if you have too much of it, it really is too much of it. And I think that if people looked at their screen time for their phones, they'd be like, wow, I'm on 3 hours a day. I'm on 2 hours a day. And my thing is, if it's making you better, great, but it's probably not. It's probably more of a distraction or a depressant. And so, I've never read for 3 hours a day and felt worse about my life. But there's lots of days I go through and I'm on my phone for that many hours and I don't feel better, right? And phones are not evil, but how we use them can be helpful or unhelpful. So I want you to wrap this up, Nathan, and tell us, when you are you're just starting off, maybe, say one of your kids is going in the industry, how would you encourage them to use comparison to make them much better faster? How can comparison be used for good instead of evil?
I think, it's funny you say that. I actually have 2 daughters that have chosen this industry now.
Okay.
So yeah, the younger of the 2 just finished her boards and graduated this past week. So it's a timely question.
Congratulations.
Yeah. But I think, kind of to your point, like when you see someone that's super successful, or what you perceive as successful, you don't know what they did to get there. So don't compare yourself to that. And what I tell them, and more important, is like, when you see someone doing great work, what are the habits that they're doing to get to that great work? Like what skills did they practice and practice and practice? What habits did they instill to make them successful? Like at the end of the day, you got to get to the nuts and bolts of their success. And that's where comparison, I think, can be a positive thing when you're comparing, like, hey, if they did it, how can I do it? And I think that's, again, a reframe, right? It's not just they did it and I'm not there. It's like, okay, if they did it, it can be done.
Yes.
So how can I do it?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
what did they do so I can do that?
I want this to be encouraging. It may not sound encouraging right away, but I want this to be encouraging. Okay. This is good cop, bad cop. I'm definitely the bad cop. Okay. So you're the good cop. But
All right.
the difference between seeing someone's post and being inspired or discouraged or jealous, which is not, you don't feel jealous and inspired at the same time. Those emotions are nowhere near each other on the emotional, cycle of life and wheel. Is that the difference between being inspired by someone and being jealous and feeling negative? The difference is this: it's what you choose. You're going to look at the exact. I can look at the exact. I met a guy in a parking lot today at Lowe's, and he had this really cool trailer on his car. And I was like, man, that's a really cool trailer. Like, where'd you get that? I was like, I could tell you some kind of professional. And he's like, oh, I build cabinets and da-da-da-da. And instead of feeling like, man, I bet that guy's business is this and this, and I wish I did it, I was like, man, that's awesome. Like, and I don't know jack about trailers. And I was like, well, tell me about your trailer. He's like, oh, it's brand new and it's 14 feet and I got this and it's got this and it's going to put in this X system. And I go, dude, what's the next system? Like he said, literally, like, I'm going to put in this, I'm going to put in the ecosystem. And I'm like, what's the ecosystem? So he got to tell me about the ecosystem. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, Ben, man, congratulations on having just an awesome business. You know what I mean? But what I wanted to do, the first inclination is like, man, that guy, I wish I had that. That was my first, that's jealousy, right? But quickly I was like, wow, but I don't really even want that. Like I'll just celebrate this guy. So that's my encouragement to you, is that if you feel like, man, social media is just not a healthy place for me. I don't really feel, it doesn't make me feel better. Open up your phone after this, go to social media and just go, man, so happy for that person. What can I learn from that person? Versus, man, bugs me how successful they are. You know what I mean? And even if you meet someone in your own town or even in your own salon, like, say, that's great. Like, would you mind telling me like 3 things you think you can attribute your success to? Because I would just love to learn from you. Very few people are going to say, that's rude. That's mean. They're going to be like, oh, I'd love to. Right? And if they're not, then like you don't want to be like them because they're a jerk.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and at the end of the day, I think you kind of nailed on it with the inspiration or not, but I think it's practicing an abundance mindset of, if someone's doing great things, that means you can do great things. It doesn't mean that they've taken it away from you or your ability to.
Yeah.
Right. It's having that abundance mindset. Like he had a great trailer. Guess what? That means it shows there's a potential for you to get a great trailer if that's really what you want.
Yeah. If I want a great trailer, I know where to get one now. I'll call Ben, right? Yeah.
Knowing that it's out there and it's available. I think of the story about the 4-minute mile, the first time the 4-minute mile was ever broke.
Yeah.
For people that are familiar with that, like they used to think that was medically impossible even. Then after the first person ran a sub 4-minute mile, like within a year, all of a sudden like dozens of people did it. It was literally like a kind of a roadblock of it's not possible. But once people know it's possible, they know they can achieve it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate, Nathan, the practicality of your advice today. And friend, I would encourage you to do a couple things. One, check out that screen time, check out how much time you're using in different apps and do an internal audit of, is that really helping me or not? I would encourage you to, if your app has lists, I know a lot of people are using Instagram for that stuff. I have a lot of lists on my Instagram, and I don't save posts and say, I'm going to look at that post again to feel bad. No, I save them to inspire myself. I have lists that I've aggregated together so go make lists and let those inspire you. Turn this tool that could be a negative thing into a really positive thing. And then remember that what Nathan said, when you start to feel jealous of someone or less than, like, you're not competing against them. You're competing against the person that you have the most control over, which is yourself. And that's a game you can win. Right? Competing with someone else, you're not going to, there's too many variables. So don't play that game, right? Play the game of how can I get better tomorrow? And I think listening to this is part of you getting better. And so the very fact that you can hear us or see us is proof that you're interested in getting better. And so I want to encourage you. I applaud you. We're proud of you. There's a lot more people in this industry that aren't listening to this than are. And it's because you're the kind of person who wants to learn and wants to get better. We just want to point you to the right person to compare yourself to. which, as Nathan said, is you, right? And just get a little bit better every day. And what do you know? You'll love that person even more, because you should. You should be proud of the fact that you're listening to this and you want to get better. Because I think a lot of people are just sort of stagnant, or they're just jealous, or they're just negative. They're waiting for the world to help them. Instead, if you're listening or watching this, you're the kind of person who's like, no, I want to control what I can control, which is me. So kudos to you. Thank you for listening. If you want to get that bonus resource that we've created about how to navigate and understand, getting into this field or even improving in this field, then I encourage you to check out our show notes. Great. There's 20 plus interview or videos in there about understanding how to get into and navigate the industry, especially if you're new. And so check that out in the show notes. And as always, we thank you for listening. And Nathan, thank you for your wisdom today.
Thank you, Andy. Talk soon.